Alright, it is the first morning of the first day of week 8 on the meat bird project. We have exactly 14 more days until the butcher date, and we're pretty much on cruise control with this project in terms of I've got all the systems worked out, and it's just putting in the time and labor to keep them fed, keep them watered, and keep them cleaned. They're happy right now because I just threw them some table scraps and some pasta, so they're excited. There's not really anything new to report except that, one, it was a really hot week, and kind of like everything else, these birds were miserable. They were doing a lot of panting and a lot of airplaning, which is when they spread their wings out to increase airflow. But they had shade, they had water, they had a fan in their coop, and they made it through. Other than that, I just wanted to point out that it's really becoming evident which ones are roosters and which ones are hens. If you see this one right here, that's a rooster. And if you see that one right there, those are hens. Pretty apparent. So along those lines, I heard my first pubescent little awkward crow out of one of these guys yesterday. So here we go, 2 weeks left, and it's about to get noisy. Hopefully I don't wear too thin on the neighbors, but it's not gonna be too bad. I'm out in the country, but still, you don't want 30 of these things blowing their horn for months on end, or you will lose friends in the neighborhood. Other than that, I think this is a good time to talk about two different things, and those things are the financial aspect of this project, as well as how I've been feeding them in a way that saves me money. So with the financial aspects, I guess the first 2 points I would make is that it's really important I'd encourage you to either repurpose something for housing your birds, or to plan to do this multiple times so that you can amortize out the cost of your structure over multiple seasons. Because even if you were to build just simple tractors for this many birds, it would be a several $100 project, and that just becomes impractical unless you're going to reusing it. I, for my piece, am reusing my wood shed, and I had to do some things like add a door and retrofit it, but that was all through materials that I gleaned from other projects. So really they don't actually have that much housing cost, because all this stuff I got for free or it's reused. The other thing I would tell you to do is to realize some economy of scale when you're doing this. So there's one of those little funny crows. But so if you're just doing 5 meat birds, it's really not worth your effort. So I did some research, and I think a lot of people start with a dozen meat birds, which you can do, and I think that's pretty reasonable in small scale. But for me, I just wouldn't be doing this with less than 25 birds. I have 60 birds in here right now, and it's just a matter of you put the same amount of time into it, you're using the same amount of gas to go to the feed store, and so realize some economy of scale out of it. Otherwise you're not going to be really happy with the costs. But other than that, I think you need to set aside the idea that you're going to be able to compete with grocery store costs. Is just impractical. But at the same time, you're going to be, you're not competing with them in terms of product. You're competing with something like a farmer's market chicken or a Whole Foods free range chicken. And those are going to be 15 to 20 bucks a piece. So when you put it from that metric and recognize that you have a better process and a better product, that's going to be help you wrap your head around the finances. For my piece, I think I'm on week 8 and I have a good handle on my inputs on this, and I think I'm going to be able to come out at $6 to $7 a bird, which is dirt cheap for this project, and I'll tell you why. And so I'm going to walk you over here and show you some things that I want to show you. But there are basically 5 costs to your birds when you're going to be having this project, and I mean actual out-of-pocket cash money costs, not your labor. And the first cost is your infrastructure, which, because I'm reusing things and repurposing materials, is next to zero. Your second cost is going to be the acquisition of your baby chicks. Here's where you can realize some savings through economy of scale. I actually started with 100 birds and brooded out 40 birds for other people. That allowed me to get them very cheaply. Then after that, you're going to have your accessory costs, which are going to be your, I guess call that like pine shavings, your electricity, your, I use something called Sweet PDZ, which controls odor and moisture. And so you have to factor that in. And then the other 2 big costs that you have to factor in is your butchering cost. I'm electing to have these birds professionally butchered. It's costing me $4.25 a bird. That's actually probably my largest cost. If you did it yourself, you could save some money. However, there are still costs, and it is just a straight up kind of nasty, tedious job, especially with that many birds. And I think it's a little bit sad. So it's something that $4.25, when you realize that they take a whole living bird and turn it into a market bird, I think that's a good price for that service. So I've elected to spend that money, $4.25 per bird. And then the last thing, and this is also probably the biggest cost for most people, but this is one of the lowest costs for me, is feeding your birds. And when you feed your birds, conventional wisdom would say to go and purchase a formulated grower diet, which is a high protein diet. It's going to cost you about $16 to $18 for a 50-pound bag. And you can raise up about 3 meat birds on a single bag. So if you're thinking about that, you're looking at like $5 to $6 per bird in feed, which would be another huge cost. And I'd say that's probably good advice for most people, is to just go out and buy those broiler bags and feed them, because it's pretty foolproof. It's scientifically formulated. But I'm doing something differently, and that's because I have a source for very inexpensive, damaged, expired, and otherwise unsellable grains. And so I've been raising these birds up on a mixture of primarily 3 separate things. And let me show you what I've been raising up on. The first thing I've been raising up on them at the bottom of this barrel, but have been layer pellets. So these are not grower pellets. These are lower protein. They're layer pellets, and they have about 16% protein. The other thing that I'm able to acquire inexpensively are shelled sunflower seeds. So these are basically cracked black oil sunflower seeds. They're actually pretty high in protein. They're 24% protein. They're also pretty high in fat. So you need to realize that. And then the last thing that I've been feeding them over here is cracked corn. And cracked corn, I don't know how I feel about it. It's very low in protein. It's like 4 to 6% protein. And I don't know that it has the most value for a meat bird project, but I have been feeding some of this off. And so I guess, how do I say this? When I started this project, I elected to feed them these things for financial reasons. I acknowledged that this was an experiment, and I went into it with an open mind, and I was prepared to, if my birds were doing poorly on this, to go out and buy commercial feed, because I think that it's not wrong to say that the best route would be to go feed commercial feed. But that being said, I also think part of the value in some project like this is being self-sufficient and being frugal, and for me this was a way I could do it. So take this as an anecdote for what has worked for me, and it's not necessarily what's going to work for you. But I would also encourage you to not over or underthink feeding your birds, because people raised chickens for meat before there were any grain mills, and they were just out foraging. So let me tell you some thoughts I had around making sure these birds had the proper nutrients, okay? And that is that basically there are major nutrients and minor nutrients you need to worry about when you're raising your birds. And so the major nutrients that we all think about would be protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And the minor nutrients, not to get too scientific, because I'm not very scientific about this, would be all the vitamins and supplemental minerals that they need. So as far as major nutrients were concerned, I primarily only concerned myself with protein. And if you compare a bag of broiler feed or grower feed, it's about 20% protein. It's pretty high in protein. And so that was kind of what I was looking at as far as target protein. And if you remember back, these layer pellets have 16% protein, and the sunflower seeds have about 24% protein. So if you think that if you fed those in equal portions and averaged out the percentages, if you were feeding 50-50 layer pellets and sunflower seed, shelled sunflower seeds, you would get about 20% protein. So that was kind of my target as far as how I was going to provide enough protein to get these birds to grow, because protein is what puts on the meat. And I will say that in practice, you can get close to that, but the other thing is these birds have a preference for certain feeds. They prefer the layer pellets most, then the sunflower seeds, and then the corn. So basically, it's hard to actually get them by weight to eat 50% and 50%. So that's not a perfect world, but what I am doing is I always feed in separate hoppers. So you only put one type of feed in a hopper. If you mix feeds, they're going to start to pick out what they don't want and throw it on the ground and only eat what they do want. But I have been trying to get them to eat about 50% sunflower seeds and 50% layer pellets. It's probably more like 60-40, maybe 70-30 in favor of the pellets, okay? But I am cognizant of keeping that protein up. That being said, I think that they probably are suffering some, they're not going to be as heavy of table birds because the protein is a little bit low. For me, that makes sense because of the cost that I acquired these. And the other thing that I would encourage you to consider are what I consider the minor nutrients, just broadly vitamins and minerals. And in a processed feed, those will be homogenized into the pellets or the crumbles. Whereas here, what we're talking about is whole corn and whole sunflower seeds. They don't have any fortification of vitamins and minerals, and the layer pellets do. So basically, I'm relying on those layer pellets to be the foundation of my mineral and vitamin supplementation and my minor nutrients. I've been pretty cognizant of possibly having a deficiency. I haven't experienced anything yet, but if I did, I would have to go out and look at some sort of other form of feed for them. Along those lines, somebody's probably going to chime in and say, there's too much calcium in that layer pellet feed, it's going to be bad for their kidneys. Yeah, you're probably right. The calcium is hard on their kidneys if they're eating that exclusively. I'd see it more, but because I'm blending it with different feeds, they're not actually getting as much calcium as if they're only eating layer pellets. The other thing behind this is my rooster only eats layer pellets and he hasn't died of kidney disease yet. So it's just one of those things where you wouldn't be wrong to tell me that scientifically this isn't the most balanced diet. But anecdotally, I've raised up these 60 birds with good health, and I was also prepared to change if I needed to, but I haven't needed to. If you're going to be using other types of feed products, other grains or whatnot, you can figure out what percentage and ratios you need to feed to maintain any of the major nutrient percentages with something called a Dairyman square. It's a way to calculate percentages of a major nutrient when you're blending feeds by ratio, so that you could get an idea for what you'd have to feed for protein for whatever you're doing. But this is how I've been doing it. This has basically meant that my feed costs have been zero. I will say that it has been some work. I've been storing feed and warehousing it since there was snow on the ground. But this is how I've been doing the project to control costs, and also I think it's a bit in the spirit of being self-sufficient or resourceful or reusing what would have otherwise gone in the trash. So I hope that's of assistance to you, and I am excited for the next 2 weeks and the finished product.